Hi, I'm Chris Knudsen, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. It's me, Mike Vardy, and I'm joined this time around by Chris Knudsen. He is the author of Trust Me, I'm a Consultant. Great conversation around consulting today. He is a published author, as you can tell. He's a university instructor, inventor, and renowned consultant. He currently works as an independent fractional CMO and is a CEO at Stoic Yeti, an advertising agency focused on helping direct-to-consumer companies. He was formerly the CMO at Purple Mattress and has started and sold several companies. We get into that. We get into a lot of the stuff he's done. And he really focuses as a consultant on helping businesses and ideas flourish alongside technological advancements. Now, I've chatted to a good number of consultants over the years, both on this podcast and outside of it. This is one of the more engaging, entertaining ones because of the way he approached the writing of this book. We get into that and so much more. So without further ado, here's my conversation, and a productive one at that, with Chris Knudsen. Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today and have a productive conversation with me today. Trust me, it's going to be a good one.
I trust you. I'm excited. I wanted to say a very productive, but I wanted to, I'll stick with the script, right? Let's make sure we're doing this the way you do it.
We'll let them decide. We'll let them decide. No,
that's
but
exactly the right way to do it.
Truth be told, the book that I'm holding in my hands, we were just chatting about this before we hit record, is Trust Me, I'm a Consultant. How I got paid in a job interview, wrote the playbook for seven-figure consulting, and learned the shocking truth about happiness. You wrote this, first off, right out of the gate, the reader's notes were like, hey, listen, this may not be the type of business book that you're used to reading. And it is very... I find that we're seeing fable style books come out, the Go Giver, the Richest Man in Babylon, the 1 Minute Manager, even more recently, How to Fight a Hydra by Josh Kaufman, a lot of fable oriented books. I interviewed, I'll put a link to the show notes, but we talked to Jim, who's the author of Clarity, and I'm going to, Vasilopoulos, I think, is how you pronounce his last name. So see, this is why I get you guys to say your names before we start, so that way. But that episode we'll link to in the show notes as well. Again, another very interesting way to write a book. Why did you decide that this was not going to be? You weren't going to go down the tried and true method of writing a business book. You did it this way.
I appreciate that question because it's actually really important to the model of the book and why the book I think is really compelling. If I don't say so myself, right? But I've read a ton of business books. I mean, I have a library of several thousand books, and many of those are business books. And business books are formulaic and boring typically, right? I mean, it's if I think back of all the business books I've read, there's probably 2 or 3 that stand out where I'm like, oh yeah, that book was fantastic. That book, I would love to go read that book again. And the other problem with business books too is that they're typically very 30,000 foot view of the world, right? Where it's I'm not giving you a lot of detail. I'm just going to kind of explain the problem, explain a little bit of the solution. There's only so much I can do in 200 or 300 pages, usually 200 pages. And I didn't want to write that book, right? I wanted to write a book that was very real, that was very raw, that was hey, I'm going to take you on a journey and show you how I was able to come into self-employment and I was able to create my own consulting business and how you can do it too. But I'm not going to lie to you. And I'm going to tell you all the hard stuff that comes along with it. I'm going to tell you some stories about things that happened to me that might sound unbelievable or they sound totally believable because you've been in the corporate world long enough that you know that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And that's where we really landed with this book. So I had spent many, many years. I was a university instructor and an adjunct instructor, and I've been in consulting for many years. And I just started collecting things, right? Like stories about this happened to me or that happened, or here's the lesson or whatever. And when COVID hit, I was sitting there. I mean, at the time, my consultancy had really evolved into more of an agency. And I was sitting there I didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, most people, I'm are we dead? Are we literally dead? Are we is the business dead? Am I facing ruin? What's going on? And I thought, well, there's so much out of my control. What I might as well do is sit down and put all of this to paper and write this book and go tell the world, here's what I think. Right. So that was the start of it. I actually wrote, it took about a year to write the book, and then I put it away because the ending wasn't right. And so the last third of the book was written earlier in 2023. And then we published the book in late 2023.
Gotcha. And you brought up a couple of things that I want to allude to. First off, you quickly corrected yourself saying that you were an instructor to an adjunct instructor. There's a story about that in the book. You're not a professor, you're an adjunct instructor. I got to tell you a quick story that when I read that in the book, there was an institution that approached me about teaching a time management class. And the key is they approached me. So it looked like it was going to all go through. They said, we need a resume from you. We just need a resume. And I said, sure. And I'm independent like you. So I like resume. All right, fine. So I went where we all go, LinkedIn, basically assembled and sent it off. And they said, well, this is great, but we need your education on there. Like, we need to know what education background you have. Like, what's your alma mater? And I said, St. Mary's Catholic Secondary School. And there was a definite pause, like in the email exchange. It was like, wait, what? Like, yeah. They're like, oh, well, and the email was so like boilerplate almost, like, well, unfortunately, we can't offer a position to someone who does not have a university degree, but thank you for pursuing this opportunity. And I'm like, whoa. So I circled back and I emailed with, well, I find that policy to be short-sighted, because if you won't work with anyone who doesn't have a university degree or a college or post-secondary degree, and I listed like a bunch of names of people who were uber successful that did not have, like Oprah and, Steve Jobs, like people who, some living, some dead, and I said, so I'm assuming that you would not work with them either based on this policy. Mm-hmm. And then it was very much like, she's like, I get it. I get what you're saying. Yes, it's a really old Ivy League-ish kind of policy. But that story about you're not one of us. You're stuff to the side. So can you share a little bit, you can share a bit about the story, because obviously this book is, it's very memoir oriented, like you mentioned. The feelings around what that story brought you and what the lesson was that you took away from it. Because that's a lot. Everything in this book has a lesson attached to each of the stories to a degree, right?
Yeah, and I really wanted to also, I'm a marketing guy, right? So I wanted you to look at the back of the book and read I put a lot of the title headings on the back cover of the book, because it explains a lot about what the book is, but I intentionally, I write a lot, right? I write a lot of copy. I write a lot of compelling copy for marketing to try and get someone to perform an action. I know if I hit you with a diabolical plan to get revenge on Reed Hastings, or how I got paid in a job interview, or how I helped 2 broke entrepreneurs fall backwards into hundreds of millions of dollars, right? I know that's gonna get you to go, oh, I want to read this, right? Yep. And you're not a professor, you're an adjunct professor, is just another one of those types of stories. And in that story, to your question, was I learned that the university system is really this is their scam. Every industry has a scam, right? Like I was my father-in-law is a dentist, and I was like, hey, they keep telling me I need to come back every 6 months to get my teeth clean. I come back about every 3 years. I never have a cavity, right? Like, what is that a scam? Do I really need to be coming back? The university scam is, let's throw as many adjuncts in here because they're cheap. We can pay them a lot less money, and we don't have to pay them the PhD rate, and we can really expand our core class offerings, and we can use MBA so when I was in MBA school, and I talk about this in the book, I got to be really good friends with the dean, because I was involved in these projects that were really kind of important to the school. They were trying to impress local venture capital firms and some of these types of things I was involved in. And he said to me at one point, he said, hey, do you want to come back and teach when you're done? I'm like, yeah, geez, holy cow, what an invitation, right? And I really learned that it was like, oh, okay, this guy could probably do it. He has half a brain. We just gave him an MBA, so he's qualified from a paper standpoint to go do this. And we can pay him the MBA rate, not the PhD rate. And that's just kind of what we do here anyway, right? So they were just recruiting a guy like me, and I came along wide-eyed thinking that it was like I was special. And I wasn't special. I was just another guy that they needed to have with a master's degree to stick in there and teach their undergrads, right? So
you fit the pay grade. You fit the pay grade. Yeah. That's really what it is. You were a line item. You were a line item in a budget.
I was teaching at a private university where the class was $3,000 in tuition per student. Okay. And I got paid $2,800 to teach the class. One student's tuition for that class covered me.
That's
it's incredible.
That's an incredible use of controllables and non-controllables in a business. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So, So yeah, basically, the other thing that I wanted to touch on was this idea of writing the book now, because as I was going through it, and we talked about this before. I went, like, the nice thing is you can go through this book in bits and pieces. You don't have to go through it from cover to cover. There's stories. There's a story about a dog, right? And I won't spoil it. It's a very short story.
Yes.
But
Sad story.
But there's a lesson there too, right? And so I'm wondering, when you were writing this and when you were thinking about the stories going into it, there must have been part of you that was thinking, there is no way I could have written this before now. Like, there's no way. There's no way. So what equipment do you have now? Like, what kind of faculties do you have now that allowed you to put this book together, especially in the fashion that you did?
Yeah, I'm going to say it's 20. I mean, at this point, I just turned 50, right? So I'm going to say it's 25 to 27 years of experience, right? And everybody goes through these things in their career where, when you're in your 20s, that's a really good time to fail. It's like, but at the same time, you just don't have much knowledge when you're in your 20s. And so people like Mark Zuckerberg are a total anomaly. And I have this whole chapter in the book where I talk about my interns that I've had over the years, right? And how they were in their 20s and they all wanted to be like Mark Zuckerberg, but they didn't realize that they weren't, and that there were a lot of things that they had to learn. And so when you go through the process of a career and then go out on your own, the ideal time really for you to become an entrepreneur and to go do your own thing is in your 40s. But guess what? We already know this because the book Fight Club talks about it. The things that you own start to own you.
Yep.
In your 40s, right? You got a mortgage, you got a nice car, you got college tuition probably that you're going to start paying pretty soon for kids and those types of things. And you're in your earnings years, you're making a lot of money. So at least you should be, right?
Yeah.
And so stepping out and saying like, okay, I'm going to take this risk and I'm going to go take the leap of faith here. And I'm going to go do this thing now that I've always wanted to go do is much more difficult later on in your life. So where this comes back to your question is, for me, I made the decision, and if you'd read this part of the book, there's a part in the book where I get fired from a job. And I decided at that point, I would think I was about 35. I was like, I'm never going to have a job again. Like, I'm never going to have a real job again. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to figure out how to make this happen and this work so that I never have to go back to that embarrassing situation again where I get terminated because of politics, right? Which is what had happened to me. So over the course of all of that time, you start to accumulate a lot of experience and a lot of stories. And I couldn't have written this book in my 20s, right? I didn't have like the experiences, and I didn't have the experience to really convey something of what I'll call really high value to a reader. They will look at it like, if you're in your 20s and you're trying to figure out like, okay, what does that path look like for me to go out and do it on my own? This book is great for you because it comes from someone who went down that path and at about 35 exited what I'm going to call the employment economy, exited that economy and entered into the economy of self-employment. And so it's a pathway for that because it just, there was no roadmap for me when I did it. There was no book that I could go pick up. And so I'm like, man, I want to give people that knowledge so that they can have it for themselves so they can go be successful at this. Cause it's not that hard to do. Frankly, it's just a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's really what it comes down to.
It's not simple though. Like, it's not. There's factors in there. It's once you start to put those things, because I did the same thing. I mean, when I think about my career trajectory, like, I've been doing this since my son is 15 years, pretty much full time. Yeah. And and I'm almost 50 as well. I'll be 50 in July. So yeah, I mean, basically it's that you kind of, now my situation was different. I quit because there were too many things going on, and I had to take a chance on self-employment versus not. And what was interesting, actually, is politics probably would have played a role in me losing that other job because it was a film festival I was working for, and the new government was more conservative in their leaning, so they may have cut funding to each of the arts categories because that's where they get cut. And I was the lowest seniority. Even though I was operations, so I was in charge of like the operations, but I was lowest seniority, so the festival director probably would have had to take over a lot of what I did. But I didn't let that choice happen because I decided when I was working on the internet already doing stuff for Envato and things like that. It was a choice between, do I go all in on internet career stuff or do I go stick with this arts career? And I chose the internet career, and it worked out pretty well. Now, at 30, was this the 3D printer company where you finally left? Was that because there's a story in here about that? I never had a midlife crisis, because you're at that point. It's interesting because at around like between 40 and 50, there is a switch that flips where you're oh, time, right? And we lost time, like a la, Thanos with the blip, if you're a pain, during COVID, right? Like COVID-19 basically created a 2-year blip for the most part, right?
Did.
So
it did, yeah.
Was that 3D printing company, and again, you can share some of the elements of that story if you want, was that the kind of the crucible for you, or was it something else?
Well, the 3D print company was born out of our consulting business. So I had a partner in the consulting business, and she started to work with Disney. And so she was doing a lot of stuff with Disney. I was doing a lot of stuff with our other clients. And we were, coordinating back and forth on various things that were happening. But she was in a consulting arrangement with Disney Research. And she came to me and she said, hey, look, Disney Research is working on this really cool 3D print product. And they have totally missed this one middle section of services they need to be able to fulfill this particular thing that they were going to be doing in the theme parks. And she's like, this would be very easy for us if we just go and we grab some video editors and some 3D editor and some of these guys that we could just light this thing up and just charge Disney, this thing that they need to go do. So we literally, she went to Disney and we did not go through the typical contract process with Disney. It was really strange. I got on the phone with a lawyer at Disney and they were like, yeah, I understand this is what we need and you guys do it. Yeah, we do it. Okay. I'm being told by the president of this division that I have to do this right now. Yes, here's your contract. And we were off to the races. And so we didn't go through what would be the normal contract procurement process at Disney. And we were off to the races with that business. And that business turned into, it was interesting because it was way ahead of its time. And it expanded into this thing that went beyond Disney, and we got Disney's blessing to go do it with other companies. In fact, we're in Disney Consumer Products, and they were like, "Oh, well, you should be talking to the guys at Lucas and Marvel." Marvel was just kind of coming into the Disney umbrella at the time. They're like, "Here, we'll set you up with the Marvel guys," and we were like, "Whoa, wow, this is amazing, right?" So we were down there on. If you're familiar with this, Flower Street in Burbank, which is where Disney Consumer Products, that we were there all the time. They meet with those guys. And it was kind of like you're in these, and then I was Sony, and then it was Paramount, and then it was all these, then we're meeting with Walmart. Walmart wants to talk about it. It was fun. It was a lot of fun, but it was a business that fundamentally fell because, and I say it fell, but it was acquired. The business was acquired, but it was acquired in a process of it failing, and the acquirer wanted to try and figure out how to really make it work. But the unit economics of that business did not work out, right? So although we had stepped away from consulting because it turned into such a massive opportunity with Disney, ultimately I ended up just going back to consulting work. And and it was this really I think that the name of that chapter is I never had a midlife crisis. I had a 3D company, right? And it was and I had this crisis 3D printing company that was a total disaster. Frankly, at the end of the day, everybody looks at that company like, wow, that is so cool. And I'm like, it wasn't cool when you were in it, man. Let me tell you that. It was a disaster. But ultimately, when I was able to finally divorce myself from that business and my partner in that business, which was difficult to deal with, I just went back to consulting work, and it was very easy to step back into consulting work. I had a lot of business right away, and so anyway, that's I think a really good lesson in the book is that 3D printing business.
I want to talk about the shifting back to consulting. I think leads to something interesting. Plus the sheer amount, as you're telling that story, I imagine that the listeners right now are like, holy, that sounds like a lot happening at varying degrees. There can be a level of overwhelm, anxiety, all these things that keep coming up. And we're going to come back before we wrap up. We'll talk about the lessons, like the TLDR stuff that you mentioned. Sure. But I want to talk about the idea of happiness being a choice, the half lie of happiness being a choice. So in a recent episode of the podcast where myself and Patrick Rohn, who we do a monthly series where we talk about different things, Patrick talks about choice. We actually dive into the concept of choice. And one of the things, when I was reading this story from you, in the book, it alluded back to that conversation, because that idea of happiness being a choice has come up many times, and I don't necessarily agree with happiness. First off, happiness being a choice, I think you're right. It's not. There are lots of things that can affect happiness being a choice, many of which we have no control over. There's there's mental illness and things like that, or capacities. Overwhelm can affect it. You can't find your way out of it. But contentment to me seems to be like, when you make your way back to consultancy, there seems to be a contentment that shows up, right? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
So how, as you're looking through the journey that you've shared, how have you tried to make sure, and I mean, there are stories that show that you definitely have a variety of things that have been going on, that contentment doesn't turn into overly comfortable or even complacency? Like, what's one of the things that you recommend to someone listening to this right now that's like, hey, listen, if you find that that's happening, here's something that I did that might help you out?
Yeah, I think that's a really good. So I think I got in that situation where I became a little bit, I was content, and then I got complacent probably in around like 2017, 2018. And I started to lose business on the consulting side, right? Where I was like, oh, hang on a second, there's something going on here where I maybe, and what it came down to is like, I just wasn't working very hard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a point, I actually think this is okay. There was a point where in there, I think 2017, where I was like, I am not going to work on Fridays this year. I'm going to go skiing. I'm going to go do whatever, but I'm not going to work on Fridays. And I arranged my schedule as such that I was able to do it, and it actually worked out really good. But I got a little too content in that, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. Especially if you want to go out on your own and you're like, my goal is I'm going to take Fridays off. Totally do it, but make sure that Monday through Thursday you're working really hard, right? And I think for me, I got to a place where I wasn't working really hard Monday through Thursday, and everything felt like a Friday. And then I was like, oh, I'm actually losing business. I need to kind of get my butt to work, right? And so that's something to be aware of. That's something that happened in that regard. But with happiness, it's mainly that contentment is also your attitude is really the most important thing, because you're going to have things that are going to happen to you in life and I do think that a lot of people who don't understand this, they kind of mistake happiness and attitude. They kind of conflate them when they should not be conflating them. And the reality is, you can be very unhappy and have a really good attitude. I've been at funerals before where I've seen people who are like, they're obviously very sad, but they're like, they lived an amazing life.
Yeah.
And religiously, I believe that they're in a better place. And they have this just amazing attitude about the situation, right? And so it's okay. I tell people it's actually okay. Like, we're trying to be in the society where we're like, hey, you should be happy all the time. And happiness is the thing. And it's like, you're right. Yeah, happiness is good. My goal is happiness. Most days when I wake up and I get out of bed, I'm pretty happy.
Yeah.
Right. But there are things that are going to happen to you that are going to make you sad, that are going to be out of your control. And the differentiator is attitude. It really is attitude. And you have to go through situations in life that make you unhappy to be able to understand a fullness of happiness.
Right.
Really, right?
Yep.
You really can't understand what happiness is until you understand some sadness, right? And so I get a little bit concerned, because I feel like a lot of the self-help in the world today is like, if you're not happy, you're just not choosing it. You're just not choosing that. It's your fault. It's your fault that you're not, and that's not really the truth, no. Right? That's kind of the half lie that I talk about. The half truth is, yes, most of the time you can control your happiness, and you do that with your attitude, and you can probably be in a pretty good place. But it's not the truth that you should be happy all the time and you can control that happiness all the time. And so, especially for those people, those among us and of your listeners as well, who struggle with like mental challenges, right? Mm-hmm. This is a really important concept to understand, right? Because you don't want to tell somebody, well, you're just not choosing happiness. That's your problem. You're just not choosing. That's not fair. That's not a fair thing to say to someone who's having struggles with mental health. Right. Yep. So anyway, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent.
No,
there,
but you're right though, because I think the thing is you can't have happiness without sadness, right? Which is why contentment lands nicely in the middle, right? Like and the thing is, if you're always happy, then there's going to be another level that like, what's next? Does euphoric become happiness? And then what's after that, right? So it's always like, it's the same thing where I talk about in my work the idea of the realms of productivity: ruthless, reckless, and reasoned. Right? Like reckless is kind of like your scattershot, your emotion generally rules that. Right? Like I've got to do stuff. I got like, and we all are emotion, and we need to tap into that. But then there's this ruthless, which is you get really myopic. Logically, I should do this. Like so, you lean heavily into logic, whereas reasoned, you're leaning into reason. Like what makes the most sense in the grand scheme of things, right? And we tend to, societally, we go to extremes, right? We either hustle hard or we, chill out, right? Or we go far to the left or far to the right. There's no middle. The middle is not sexy. The center, even the center will not hold, people say. Yeah, but the center is, if we all focus on it, the center can hold, right? So to me, the dangerous part is when contentment becomes comfort, it can turn to complacency. And that's where you will either go, I've got to be happy. I've got it. Like you try to force it, or you just dig deeper into the other side of things. So like the quiet desperation that you talk about, the Thoreau quote, right? Like we live lives of quiet desperation. It's like no one talks about it, but it's all there, right? And it's almost like there's no way out, right? Yeah. I mean, think about it. Like the story you told about the, not having the midlife crisis and making the 3D printing company, like at points you probably thought there's no real way out of this. Like, sure. And the only way to kind of do that, and this is one of the things that your book does, and I think books that your book is not exclusive to this because it gives space, not just time, but space. And that's why certain books shouldn't be read, like Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being. Like,
I read it. It's great.
But you can't sit and read it all in one sitting.
You're right. You can't. In fact, I broke that book up over a long period of time.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. It'd be like, honestly, if you're a spiritual, like the Bible, like if you literally were to read this, and I'm being very theoretical here, right? But I was raised Catholic, so I have some experience in reading the Bible. It's that if you read it in one sitting, you know what I mean? Or you try to read it in large chunks, there's no room for some of those contextual things to kind of really form, and you become really literal about it, right? Yeah. And the problem with that is that certain things are not timeless in that. Just ask A.J. Jacobs in his book, The Year of Living Biblically. There's certain things that just don't roll over literally into society over years and years and years. It's Arnold Bennett's How to Live on 24 Hours a Day. There are timeless things in there. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. But you need perspective and space. Well, the only way you get perspective is through space. And space can be in the form of the Friday that you take off, right? Because even though you were not working, your brain is still doing that kind of stuff. Like it's working in the background. And when I look at, like, I'm looking at here, the epiphanies can happen. And you don't need a COVID-induced epiphany to necessarily realize some stuff. You talk about that near the end of the book. You think you have time, but you don't. Now, I want to couch this because I just said we need space and time. And then you say something like this, like, oh, so I'm running out of time? I would love for you to kind of take that and let's be, like you even said, like, let's be realistic and cognizant of people's challenges around happiness. Like, same thing with this, because you can say you think you have time, but you don't. We hear things like live for today because tomorrow isn't guaranteed, right? Memento mori, which remember you will die, right? Which all very valid, important things to acknowledge. But we can take all of those things too far. So let's talk about that epiphany that you had, because I think it's important, because it isn't like you just went, that's it, I got to go. Like, it wasn't like a reactionary epiphany. It was something you responded to.
Yeah, I think that it is the crisis that I'm in right now. I don't know if crisis is the right word. Like turning 50 was a really dramatic thing for me, right? Not traumatic, dramatic, right? Because it was like I find myself looking at this place, and I think as I wrote the book, I was leading up to 50. I released it when I turned 50. Now I've been 50 for a couple months. And I'm really trying to understand my place in the world at 50 years old.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and 50 snuck up on me. And I think I had some expectations maybe at 20 or 30 or 40 of where I would be at 50, where I'm not. I'm just not in that place where I thought I might potentially be. Right. A lot of people, the message there too, in terms of you think you have time, but you don't, is people are procrastinators generally. And they think, well, when my kid graduates from high school, then I'll do it, or this happens, then I'll do this thing or whatever. And we're frequently looking for excuses to put things off that are really important. And you really shouldn't put those things off. And in that chapter, I talk about, like, my mom got cancer. My buddy that I work out with had a heart attack, right? He almost died. And, and it's like, wow, yes, memento mori. There are some things that, like, you will die, right?
Yeah.
There's something that can happen, but it's like, at the same time, I view every day as, and I think I drive my employees a little bit crazy with this too, because I'm like, every day matters. Like, every single day counts. Like, what did we get done today? Oh, we'll get it done tomorrow. I'm like, no, like, it matters today for us to get this stuff done. Like, we got to move faster. Right. And,
but I
and
think really quickly though, I
Yeah.
just want to. But I think the distinction that you made, and that can't be lost on people, is it's not getting to inbox zero. It's not the empty calorie kind of stuff that you're talking
Sure.
about here. That's the tricky part, because there's so much vying for our attention that we confuse activity with productivity. We confuse we confuse quantity of what we've done as that was a productive day versus quality of what we've done. And there needs to be, again, that middle, that balance, but it's hard to as you know, having, you're a consultant. Your job is to get results, but not all results are quantitative. Some of them are qualitative. Sure. Some of them take time, some don't. So incremental progress is harder to measure for those qualitative things because, like again, this book, you talked about it earlier. There's no way you could have put what you have in this book 10, 15 years ago, because there's qualitative lessons in here that you learned through the passage of time and the accumulated experience, right? So I just want to drive that point home, because working, when you hear, like, a lot of these phrases, like the idea that the early bird gets the worm. People say, yeah, but the second mouse gets the cheese, right? Like, so we remove the second part of the axioms, right? So yes, working faster important, but faster on the right things, not just faster for the sake of speed, right?
Right, working on the right. I'll tell a story from the book that I think illustrates this really well. It was I think the title heading is "Working Next to the Arc to Triumph Sucks," right? Yep. And it's a story about when I was in Paris one time, and I went to exchange some currency at a currency exchange window. And the lady who was working behind she was younger, and she was working behind the window. She spoke really good English. She said, and I said, hey, I need to exchange this. I need to get some money or whatever. And she says, oh, where are you from? You're American, right? And I said, yeah. And she says, where are you from? I'm from Utah. And she says, where is that? I said, it's by, when somebody asks me like that, I'll typically tell them, it's by the Grand Canyon, right? Yep. Or it's by Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
It's by Yellowstone or whatever.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's like, you said, actually, interestingly, when we were chatting initially, you mentioned Vancouver, BC, right? Well, Victoria is like a 95-minute ferry ride away on Vancouver Island, which confuses people as well. But you're right. In most cases, I'll say, oh yeah, near Vancouver. Or it's the closest city to Seattle in Canada. Like, I'll mention things like that, but you're right. Like, or if you're from like a city in Canada that, like, there's far fewer places to choose. Like, if you're from Alberta, you'll say Calgary or Edmonton. If you're from Ontario, you'll say Toronto, and people are like, oh, Toronto, right? So there you go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's she was funny because she said she got really excited, and she was like, my dream is to go and see all of these sites in Western America. I want to go to all the national parks. I want to see Las Vegas. I want to go to Disneyland, and she's like, and I grew up in Paris. I've never been out of France, and I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to do that. Right. And I thought, you got your whole life ahead of you. And I said, I think I said there, I think I pointed at it. I'm like, you literally work across the street from the Arc de Triomphe. She's like, I know, but I see it every day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, sometimes you have to take a step back and get some perspective. And it's like, sometimes you're in a really good place. And for her, I kind of tried to help her understand, like, hey, you're young and you're going to work. And we encounter Europeans all of the time in Utah. Like I remember one time I was in Moab, Utah. I went with my wife. We were going mountain biking. Everybody in the hotel was from Europe.
Yeah.
Except us. Like, and we were talking to these Europeans and it was great. And I'm like, you're going to work, you're going to grow up, you're going to save money, and you're going to come see Western America. And don't worry about it. You're going to get there at some point, right? Mm-hmm. But it is sometimes you have to recognize that we're maybe in a little bit of a better place than we think that we're in, right? And that's the perspective. That also applies back to that happiness component that we talked about earlier. It's like perspective gives you like this, it helps you to understand like, oh, actually, yeah. Well, I don't know why. Actually, why am I sad? I've got it. Yeah. Like, look around me. I told my wife last night, I'm like, I got all these problems, but I'm healthy. My wife loves me. My adult children still want to talk to me and hang out with me. And like, I have some money in the bank. And I'm like, so I think I'm okay. In light of all these other huge problems I'm dealing with right now, if I look at those things, like, okay, I think I'm in a pretty good spot.
Right. But it's tricky. To your point, the tricky part is that using that as like just as a reminder, as opposed to, because this is where contentment can turn into, well, I'm fine. Like this, right. It's the dog in this is fine with the flames all around him and stuff like that. So yeah, to your point, right? This is fine, right? And I mean, so being aware, like all of these things that take, again, time and space, perspective, awareness, reason, clarity, focus, concentration. You can't just call on them. So getting like a glimpse of happiness is sometimes enough, right? Like, okay, I'm going to take a glimpse as to what's going on. Okay, now I'm back in it. When I look at the lessons that you've shared at the back, and we'll wrap up here, the TL/DR rules, like all of these things, are not, let's be honest, they're not new necessarily in terms of, but they are, what's interesting about them is that they are, because they come from your voice, it resonates in a different way, right? Like, so it'll resonate with the reader. So, empathy is everything, right? Risk does not mean you should not act, right? Like things like that, so you think about these rules, which if I'm thinking about these rules, I'm looking at them right now and you've got 20 of them. Which of these 20 rules do you find that you adhere to more than any other?
Well, I'm typically trying to...
Don't say 20 either.
No, when I'm typically I'm a really big on the rules around like I like the one that you used on risk. That's my favorite. Risk does not mean not act, right?
Yep.
That's a really, really big one. Even most people I have a relative and they're a doctor, and like even the remotest amount of risk that looks like there could be even possible some type of physical injury, like riding a bicycle, is too risky of an activity for them because they worked in an emergency room way too long.
Yep.
Right. And they think everybody's going to get hurt, right? Because they've seen all these accidents, right? And in some cases that's true. Like a lot of people who ride motorcycles end up in the ER. That's true, right? That doesn't mean that you shouldn't act and do things that are statistically like you're going to be okay, right? So I like really focusing on like the little things, like the important things are always simple and the simple things are always hard. And I told a really good story in the book about that component, right? I'm trying to drive this one home with my employees right now. It's like, it's okay to have a problem, but try and bring a solution to the table with the problem. Like come and talk to me about the problem, but say, hey, I thought through it. Here's what I think we should do, boss. Right? Oh, yeah, good. And they just need the validation that that's the right thing to go do. Where they frequently just come and they're like, I got a problem and I'm dead ended, right? And I'm like, okay, well, did you think through what some of the solutions might be? No, that's why I need you. No, I need you to go back and I need you to think about your solutions and then come back to me and let's work it out together, right? That problem that we talked about with the lady who was in Paris, that is a perception problem. Her perception was her reality. And so I have a client right now where they have this really bad perception of their business situation, but that perception is their reality, right? Yep. And I have to keep reminding my team of like, hey guys, you got to have empathy for, which empathy is part of this too. You got to have empathy for the client because the client literally believes this is their problem. So we have to help them see that their perception of their situation isn't actually their reality. And we have to do that with like love. We got to do that with some empathy and kindness, and then we can get them into a spot where they can grow again, right? And so I'm kind of big on all those things, and maybe I'm stuck because of some conversations that have been in the last 24 hours on some of this stuff that's really maybe a little bit more related to business. But don't do anything that compromises your agency, right? Mm-hmm. If you take heroin, you're going to compromise your agency. The heroin will control your life, right? Yeah. And frequently people alcohol will control your life. It's okay to drink, right? But if you let it control your life and you lose your agency for that, you've lost everything. If you've lost your agency, your ability to make your own decisions for yourself, right? So never do anything that compromises your agency. So always think about the consequences before you act. That's really bad. To your point, Mike, that's a really basic thing that everybody should understand. But it's like, look, if you go do this thing, what's the repercussions of it, right? Like I think about this all the time. I'm like, I got to go have a hard conversation with this employee. And what I'll usually do is like, Barack Obama said this thing one time that I thought was really good. He said, sometimes what I do is I sit down and I write the letter and then I throw the letter away and I write a different letter, right? Because you got to get it all out in the first letter and you got to yell. And you got to see the stuff that you shouldn't say. You tear that one up, and then you sit down and you write what you really should say, right? And that's another component of this too. But yeah, those 20 life rules, the too long, didn't read the book. If I flip to the back of the book and I see those 20 life rules there, I didn't invent them. They were mostly things that I learned along the way for myself, and I maybe positioned them in the book a little bit more around my way of thinking. But I do think that they're important rules to live by for life.
Well, you're not going to flip to the back of the book when you pick it up because there's a lot of gold before the back of the book. It's Trust Me, I'm a Consultant. Chris Knudsen is the author. Chris has been my guest today. Thank you so much for taking part in this conversation. Where can people keep up with you and pick up the book?
Yeah, Amazon. You can grab the book at Amazon. I'm mostly on all social media. You can find me on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn at /Chris Knudsen, all one word. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find, and I put like all the places to find me in the book as well. So I'm out there.
Chris, thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thank you, Mike. It was great. Appreciate your time.
Big thanks to Chris for joining me on the program today. You can check out everything that we talked about, relevant show note links and all that fun stuff at productivityist.com/podcast 517. You can also check out all of those wherever you get your podcasts, which might be your iPhone, Android, the computer. You can go to the website page. Actually, that's what I just shared with you to check out the episode there. While you're on the website, be sure to check out productivityist.com/podcast sponsors to learn more about the sponsors you heard during today's conversation and a few more. And if you click on the links, if any of those services or products aim to serve you where you're at right now, or maybe someone you know, then click on those links. That way they know that we sent you. That's it for this episode. I'll be back next week with another episode of A Productive Conversation. Until then, I'm Mike Vardy, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.